They always have a hero overcoming fear and developing courage and then succeeding. But the thing I kind of like about Piglet is he's never really overcoming the fear ever.
Piglet's always afraid, but there's a difference between fear and bravery, I feel.
That's right.
He's the bravest one of the Winnie the Pooh cast. Most of the characters have a certain level of fear, but they have ways that they overcome that. Piglet is terrified constantly of everything, but he still goes on all those adventures with them. And that's courage. It's easy to do something you're not afraid of. It's really hard to do it despite the fact that you have that fear and everything in your body is screaming at you to run and hide.
The acceptance that all feelings are okay to have, I think, is a message we're starting to talk more about. Hi, I'm Traci Donnelly. I'm your host of Making Impact, and I'm joined by my friend, Travis Oates. Hi, welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you, Traci.
Thank you, too. I said Travis Oates, but who's your alter ego?
I have a few alter egos. You're probably talking about the small pink one, and that would be Piglet from Walt Disney's Winnie the Pooh. I've been the voice of Piglet for almost 20 years, just shy. The original voice of Piglet was John Fiedler, and there's really just been John myself over since, I guess, the 60s or 70s. I'm not sure when John first, I think it was 74 when John first voiced.
And how was it stepping in? Now, were you working with John prior to stepping into the role of Piglet?
So no, it's interesting. When I originally auditioned for Piglet, I was told that I was coming into ADR, a very small segment. And ADR basically means that the footage has already been generated and I'm coming in afterward to try and match my voice to the existing footage for some unknown project. What they didn't say at the time was that John was in the last stages of terminal cancer and that he would not be able to continue. That was not something they wanted to make public at that time. And in fact, for the first full year when I voiced Piglet, I was actually listed as other voices because John had done preliminary work on those projects.
Okay.
Even though for most of them, I had to replace everything that he had done, but they still were loyal to someone who had been with the Disney Corporation for years and years. So yeah, I unfortunately never got to meet John. I tried to make an arrangement once I realized what was happening.
Right.
He was New York based and I'm here in Los Angeles, but we weren't able to make our schedules work. And he passed pretty quickly after I became the voice.
Oh my gosh. And did you have any connection or relationship with Piglet before? Were you a Winnie the Pooh fan and this was one of your characters you knew?
I mean, a little bit. My sister and I used to, with birthday greetings and stuff like that, she would refer to me as Winnie the Pooh and I would refer to her as Piglet occasionally. So there was a little bit of that. When they asked me to do the voice, I didn't think I could do it at all. I figured I could do Winnie the Pooh because I just know the timbre of my voice and I know pretty well, back then, less so than I do now, of what my voice was capable of. And I didn't think I could do Piglet at all. And in fact, I think the reason I got the role is I didn't try to do Piglet. I tried to do John Fiedler because they alter the voice. They pitch it up and it speeds up slightly. Well, back in the day, it was automatically sped up because of the nature of how they do it. Now they can pitch and speed independently. So the voice didn't actually sound like John. So John's voice, John talked like that. And that was how John actually talked. That was his actual voice. If you go and you can see John was in a few Twilight Zones, and I think he was in Harper Valley PTA, the movie, and I think he was in Cannonball Run. But there are a few movies that he was in, and I watched the episodes of Twilight Zone in particular that he was in and just tried to do his voice. So when I went in and auditioned, I wasn't doing Piglet. I was doing John Fiedler, knowing they were going to pitch it up.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
So that gets to the next question, because it's kind of like an invisible art. to most people to understand the voice behind things. At least I'm speaking from my perspective, because this is not my world, right? So what is it you would want everyone to know about the world where, like, even everything you just said to me, I was about to say, what is ADR? But then you went ahead and explained it, obviously looking at my puzzled look. But like, what is it you'd want everyone to know? Because I love animation. Like, I do watch a lot of animated things, and I don't think I ever really make the connection of how important it is, because it is the soul of that person is coming through, whether it's animated or not, in a voice.
Yeah, and it's changed a lot over the years. I think, I mean, nobody's going to like to hear this, but because I get asked a lot, how do I get into animation? How do I get into doing voiceover work? And it's super, super, super hyper competitive now. It used to be, back when I became Piglet, that people like me could do these famous voices, because who was the voice behind the character was not stressed and as important, as far as they just wanted somebody who sounded the role, right? Now, a lot of that there was a shift. It was mostly DreamWorks. When DreamWorks started up, Jeffrey Katzenberg wanted to be celebrity driven. So he started casting big celebrities in all of the DreamWorks productions. And that was how they marketed their films. And because DreamWorks was so successful in doing that, that became the industry standard. And I remember exactly when that shifted, because doing an audition, I'm one of the only men who do female voices that don't sound like female voices. Like I regularly have done women's voices because I have a very high girlish sounding voice, I guess. And I remember I was going to be the Sea Witch for the direct-to-video Little Mermaid 3. And so I was going to be like Ursula's sister or something like that. And I had gone all up and they said, oh, we love it. You're great. You're in. The only thing that might change is we've went out to Smokey and the Bandit, Sally Field. We went out to Sally Field. If Sally Field says yes, then we're going to go with Sally Field, but she's not going to say yes. Well, Sally Field said yes. And I lost out a role to Sally Field. So I remember thinking to myself, well, that's different. That, because up to that point, I had never lost a role that was straight to video. That was a straight to video thing to a major celebrity. And it just got worse after that. So I do audition now. When I audition with like Brad Pitt and stuff like that. So it's a little bit more difficult to like break into, especially for somebody new.
Yeah. And I guess that's really just for the marketing, to get the interest, you knowing that you're coming in and people are putting a face to the voice. But in a way, if you think about it logically, then when you're sitting there looking at it and it's Brad Pitt, are you really connecting it with the character it's supposed to be? Or are you thinking, hey, that's Brad Pitt, right? I don't know. That's interesting, because
sometimes it works. I mean, we brought Brad Pitt very famously when DreamWorks did, I think it was Sinbad. It got lambasted because it was Brad Pitt and they didn't think he did a very good job at being Sinbad. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It all depends on the celebrity. Sometimes celebrities are fantastic at this stuff, but it is also a thing. You're right. It's completely marketing. The voice of Groot is Vin Diesel. The voice of Rocket Raccoon is Bradley Cooper. Those aren't necessary. They don't sound like Vin Diesel or Bradley Cooper. Like you don't hear those voices so it's purely a marketing ploy. But, it certainly works. I mean, it's funny, Eeyore went from a bunch of people you've never heard of to now he's Brad Garrett. They'll pick more and more famous people as time goes on.
So that brings me to when we're talking about voices and whatnot. So Piglet has a very distinctive voice that's conveying an emotion or a feeling.
Sure.
And that feeling is anxiety and nervousness, right? So thinking of all the things we've just said, is that something you're consciously, is that a technique? Or is it like if you're an actor and you're stepping into a role, you're trying to like summons up a time I was anxious or a time I felt nervous? Is that sustainable in voice?
I think it all depends on two factors. I think it also depends on what you're reading and the voice actor themselves. There are some voice actors that are method actors, and method is you place yourself in the situation and emotional state of the character. The problem with doing that in voiceover is a very technical and precise thing.
Right.
It's more difficult to do that kind of thing because they're like, okay, can you do that again? But it has to be 4.5 seconds long. Or, yes, but can it be just a bit higher or just a bit? There's a lot of precision that goes into some of that stuff. Now, when you're doing long form narrative voiceover, where you're doing a film or you're doing a TV show, then you can sometimes try to place yourself. And there's certainly been times where I try to place myself, where Piglet is. But there are other times where, because they want very precise things to happen, that isn't a natural timing that your voice would normally
It's driving
do.
like a technique as opposed to generating an emotion.
Right. Then, you have to kind of rely on just the control of the voice itself. I know that the animators prefer that you emote when you do your work, because you actually have, especially if you're doing a film, less so if you're doing a television show because of just the nature of how TV is animated. But if you're doing a film, always they'll have a camera on you when you're doing your lines so that the animator can look at your actual face and go, all right, what are they doing with their face? And how are they looking when they're emoting, so that they can take cues from that when they're animating the character.
Well, that's interesting, because you brought up the first time you read for it, you were actually seeing the animation already completely done and then trying to match your voice to it. Is there a way it happens versus, is it more typical that you read and then they're animating, or does it? Yeah.
So normally they would animate to the voice.
Okay.
And you're given complete autonomy on the timing and how you would do it. If you're doing something like dubbing Japanese anime, or if you're dubbing, like I did at the beginning, some existing works, then I'm watching the animation and I'm trying to match what I'm saying to the timing that's happening on the already completed animation, which is much more difficult, as you can imagine. Again, nowadays, that's easier. 20 years ago when I was doing it, they didn't have the tools that they do now. Now they can practically manipulate what you're doing on a micro level and make it fit exactly, if they want to take the time and money to do so. So ADR is not quite as much of an art as it was at some point. But it's certainly more difficult. I highly prefer doing it the other way.
Yeah, and then they're sort of creating the art around your intonations, your tone,
Right.
and then the mannerisms of that character. One of the things I really love about Piglet, and knowing I was going to have this conversation with you, is I feel whenever there's a hero in a show, and I was talking to a few people about this, and it's an odd thing to bring up. I'm like, I'm going to be doing a podcast with Piglet. And I really want to sort of understand his character. They always have a hero overcoming fear and developing courage and then succeeding. But the thing I kind of like about Piglet is he's never really overcoming the fear ever. He's just building up his will and his desire through other selfless emotions, like his loyalty to his friends and his desire to do right. So he almost stays in fear and anxiety, but does the right thing. Can you relate to that at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I do conventions, which I don't do a lot, but I do some, I can usually spot the Piglet fans. I don't know if you've ever seen The Tao of Pooh. It's a book that talks about how each one of the characters in Winnie the Pooh represents a specific archetype emotion.
Right.
And there is a little bit of truth to that. And you can tell the people that the shy, introverted, Piglet lovers, and I've had people come up to me very emotional and tell me that like how much Piglet has meant to them over the years and that Piglet has helped them overcome, their fears and so forth. And I'll tell you what I always tell them. And it's always a very gratifying experience to talk with them, to know that in some small way, something that I've done has been able to touch them in that way. But the way I've always viewed Piglet, because you really touched on something that a lot of people I don't think realize, is that you're right. Piglet's always afraid. But there's a difference between fear and bravery, I feel. And I think I've always told them, because they see themselves as Piglet in the world. And a lot of them have physical or mental disabilities that they're trying to overcome, or some kind of social anxiety that they're trying to overcome. And the way I always view it with Piglet is that he's the bravest one of the Winnie the Pooh cast.
Yeah.
Because Tigger has no fear. And so he just goes off and does whatever he does. And Winnie the Pooh doesn't really have a ton of fear. Most of the characters have a certain level of fear, but they have ways that they overcome that. Piglet is terrified constantly of everything, but he still goes on all those adventures with them. And that's courage. Right? That's true courage in the face of fear, because it's easy to do something you're not afraid of. It's really hard to do it despite the fact that you have that fear, and despite the fact that everything in your body is screaming at you to run and hide, but you go out in the world and you do that stuff anyway. And I applaud the people who are able to do that, because there's a lot of people just like Piglet that the world is a very scary place for them for a variety of reasons, for things that have happened to them in their past, things that they're afraid is going to happen in their future, the state of their life or their family's lives, and the fact that they get up and they do that anyway. That to me is unbelievably brave and laudable.
Well, thank you for that, because that's exactly how I see it. And I also looked, when you look at how A.A. Milne characterized Piglet too, many of the characteristics in our society are considered weaknesses, right? And things that people are almost ashamed to have. People don't want to talk regularly about what they're afraid of or anxiety. But so it's never really painted in a way that it's a weakness, because in many ways, Piglet is solving something, right? Piglet is the success or the answer to resolving a lot of the issues. That's like, I think, a really powerful message.
Yeah. And it's a strange thing about how we view emotions as a culture too. I have a 12-year-old son, and one of the things that he has always struggled to understand and is getting much better at just recently is this perception that there are negative emotions and positive emotions. Right. And I've constantly had to tell him there's no such thing as a negative emotion. You can do negative things as a result of an emotion, but you could do negative things out of joy and pleasure just as much as you can out of anger or sadness. And that you're right. We have a tendency, especially with boys, raising a boy in today's age, that he would do anything in his power to stop from crying. He wouldn't want to cry. If we were watching a sad movie or we were doing whatever, as he became older, he didn't want to cry. And I cry freely. Like as part of the reason that I do that is because as an actor, you need to be in touch with those emotions. I can cry on cue if I want, if I'm
not going to ask you to do that,
yeah,
but
sure.
I do appreciate
But so he's never seen that from me. And I've always told him, you see, Dad, I cry at sad commercials sometimes. Like, you don't see me as weak or that being a failure. And he's just recently, two occasions within the last 2 weeks where he was watching something sad and he allowed himself to actually cry at it, not fall to complete pieces, in despair, but have the natural emotion that you would have when you're confronted with that. And I think that's something, especially for men and boys, that's really important. It's important to be able to show sadness without thinking that that's a weakness, or be able to. Another thing in today's society too, which I think is a problem, is to show anger. It's okay to show anger. You don't want to flip a table over or throw things or hit somebody, but we shouldn't be afraid to say, yeah, that makes me angry. We're living in a world right now where there are a lot of things that make us angry. And if we're not given the freedom to show those emotions sometimes, it's okay to scream into a pillow, then that's when things, I think, do become negative. They get pushed down, and they become something that's kind of at the core of us and starts to hurt us and give us ulcers and, have all kinds of other issues.
Yeah, I think, bringing up one of the most important points is we have a spectrum of feelings, and that there's a reason that we have those. And it's a lot of times when I'm talking to kids or people I'm working with and whatnot, it's the proportion to your response to a certain situation, right? So how is that? And everybody has different life experiences. So what may make you, bring you to tears of joy or sadness may be different than the things that bring me to joy or sadness. But the acceptance that all feelings are okay to have, I think, is a message we're starting to talk more about. And I think it's post-COVID. If I'm being honest, I have not, in the history of my too long to say career in this world, have felt that we're at a time now where people are talking more about mental health, why it's important, and why it's okay to talk about it, and how it's actually braver to get help than it is to try to grin and bear it anymore. Because that I think sometimes goes back to, I'm not sure if I do think part of it is gender, but part of it's also our roles in people's lives, right? And so I'm wondering, out of all the voices you've done or your career path, are there any characters that stood out to you more than others that you felt like you fully, like, wow, I can really connect to this? Like, I feel like I'm aligned more with this character than any other. Or do you use any of your characters, like perfect examples, having a conversation with your 12-year-old? Do you ever bring that into your home and have those conversations?
That's interesting. It's interesting raising a child and doing this, for sure. My son still stumbles upon things where he didn't know that I did specific voices. And it's got, you were the voice of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah. When he was very young, I remember when he was 3, I think, and it was in the car. And it was the first time that I think I was auditioning for one of the Warner Brothers characters, like Yosemite Sam or something like that. And so I was talking to myself, and he realized that I could do most of the characters, from Bugs Bunny, all those Daffy Duck and everything. And then followed a 2-hour marathon of him just having me do every character. And he just wanted to talk to those characters. He didn't want to talk to me. He didn't want to acknowledge that Dad was doing those voices. He just wanted to talk to Daffy Duck. He just wanted to talk to Elmer Fudd or whatever. And then every time we would get in the car, that's what would happen for like a few weeks. Going in the car just meant that he was going to talk to all these animated characters. And I was almost the voice of Mickey Mouse. I came very close to being Mickey. And when I was doing Mickey, there was a lot of my practice came from talking to my 3 and 4-year-old about, as Mickey Mouse and stuff. I'll tell you a story. It's not my story, but it's Jim Cummings' story. Jim Cummings, who is the voice of both Tigger and Winnie the Pooh. Good friend of mine, known him obviously for 20 years. And he's been the voice of both of those for, I think he's been Winnie the Pooh for at least 30 years, and he's been Tigger for probably around 25. And I'm sure if he saw this, he'd be correcting me on those dates and saying, no, it's much more. He told me a story. So Walt Disney is responsible for, I think it's somewhere between 70 and 80% of the Make-A-Wish Foundation requests.
Oh, wow.
So
It makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. And they're a big proponent of Make-A-Wish, and they work with them quite a bit. And Jim, it was either through Make-A-Wish or another foundation along those lines, had a child that was extremely autistic, who was nonverbal, but had always reacted positively to the work that Jim had done. And Jim has been hundreds and hundreds of characters, from Darkwing Duck to Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, but like so many characters. If you play World of Warcraft, he's a bunch of characters there. Video games, movies, he just has been so many characters. Met this child on the phone, and the child started saying characters, and he would talk to the child in those characters. And they talked for about a half an hour, and Jim was like, this kid, because he was bringing up like deep cuts that Jim was like, oh my God, like this kid like has an encyclopedic knowledge of what he was doing. And I'm going to get emotional telling this story. And so he talks to the kid for half an hour. And then the mom comes on the phone, and the mom is crying. And he's like, is everything okay? And she says, he doesn't speak. He says, this is the first time in a long time that we've heard our son's voice. And, you know, that blew Jim away, because he was having a long conversation with this kid, which his parents had never experienced.
And he never knew that when he got on the phone. He just assumed that he was having a conversation as was expected, and not knowing that he actually had helped.
Gave those parents the gift of hearing their son speak.
Yeah, and giving him the gift of being able to have a voice around something he was deeply connected with.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm wondering if that's similar to what was happening with your son, right? Having a conversation with characters. Right?
Yeah.
And you're getting to learn who your son is and what his interests were and his curiosities.
Children have a direct connection to their imagination that adults lose over time.
Can I get you a tissue or something? Are you sure?
I'm fine. Yeah. It's funny.
That was such a story.
I told that story lots of times, but once you've had a kid, it becomes, I think, more personal. But children have an innate connection to their imagination. I taught improv for like 25 years, and teaching adults improv is mostly a matter of trying to get adults to return to the place that they were as children, when they were playing with dolls and action figures and so forth, and just talking in their head as these characters. Children do that naturally. It's in fact, one of the big problems with children sometimes is they actually don't differentiate too much between imagination and reality, which makes them terrible witnesses sometimes, you know, because their imagination and their reality is so intertwined. But so for him, he was having conversations with those characters. I don't think he felt like he was pretending to. For him, it was a chance to talk with, you know, Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny or what have you. So, and then you lose that over time. You kind of, you know, put away childish things, kind of thing.
Well, you lose your creativity and imagination to a certain degree, because the world is telling you, stop, right? It's time to, unless you're actually fortunate enough to be in the world where that is what you have to preserve to continue to move forward, but life still intrudes.
Look, it's one of the reasons why I've always stressed fantasy for adults, Dungeons and Dragons, video games, what have you. You know, not to such an extent. So often, I think, especially with video games these days, that people, well, you can become addicted to it and everything. Well, you can become addicted to anything. So you shouldn't do anything in excess to the point where it takes over your life. But exercising that imaginative part of you, what I primarily do for a living is I'm a writer. Without being in touch with that imaginative quality, I couldn't do anything that I do, right? Being a writer, you have to tap into that. So I think, and I think honestly, anything that you do, we require that imagination, that creativity, that spark to kind of drive those things. Even if you're an accountant, you can be a creative accountant, that will still make you a better accountant.
I'm going to tell you that's going on right now in many not-for-profits because everybody's funding's getting cut and people are struggling with finding ways to, we're always in a world where we have to take $1 and turn it into 5, right? And we have to demonstrate the ability to make sure that we know where our resources are going. So I do appreciate that because I've seen people become completely creative and imaginative and finding ways that we don't lose a service. It's
thinking outside the box is basically just an adult way of saying,
you're creative.
Be creative, be a little kid.
That is true.
Think like a child.
And what are you writing? You talked about writing.
I've written quite a few things. I've written for television and film. I was supposed to be directing a film in Canada last year, but tariff issues and everything kind of collided with that. We're still set to do it later this year. But yeah, I'm a director and a writer primarily for a living. I write for, let's see, what all the things that I've done in the past. I was on the launch team of G4, which was a video game network back in the 90s. For those of you who remember G4, Will Wheaton and I used to host a show called Arena.
Is there a particular writing genre or style that you're drawn to that really taps into your that you're passionate about? And what is that?
Anything that does not involve the real world. So I often tell when people are looking to hire me, I often say, if it's something that couldn't actually happen, I'm probably your guy. So I've written and directed horror films, fantasy, science fiction, pretty much anything that, like I said, even like I have occasionally, I wrote a biop one time, but it's like, that is not generally what I do. My sweet spot is science fiction, horror, and fantasy.
That's fantastic, right? Yeah. So you're not going to tell us anything about your film, I'm sure, until it gets closer.
What about, I will say this about this. So it's called Here After All. Yeah, I'll tell you just in general what it's about. It's about a guy whose wife leaves him and he moves into an apartment in Burbank. It's set here in California, and discovers that his hall closet is a doorway to heaven. And wackiness ensues.
So you think that can never happen?
Well, in Burbank, I don't know.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I would say it's flavor of the old movie Oh God, if you remember back in the day, which is one of my favorites. He's got that kind of a flavor to it. It's not really a religious film and has obviously there's some religious connotation because it's heaven, but it's not really about religion.
Correct. And what is, I wanted to get back a little bit to Piglet because there's something I'm always trying to correlate it to the world today or to the work that we're doing at Make an Impact or Child Center is how Piglet is never the loudest, most obvious voice in the room, yet highly effective voice. So what message do you think that's sending in a place where we are sort of overrun with loud, being the loudest voice in the room, being the one that pushes an agenda forward? And I'm sure people experience this, whether they're at work, whether it's a personal relationship in your life. Are you seeing any correlations in your life? Because I'm thinking about people I work with who are like the piglets in my world. So how do you feel about that as a strategy for moving an agenda forward?
I mean, I guess consistency. I mean, the problem is I think because going back to what we talked about before, because we have a tendency to tamp down things that are negative emotions, right? If somebody starts to cry, you say, oh, don't cry. Right. Or, try to pull yourself together. Or if somebody's angry, calm down. It's always trying to get them to not do that.
And that always works when you're angry and someone tells you to calm down.
Calm down. Yeah.
That's the That's not the antidote to calming down.
And usually it's because we're uncomfortable with that emotion. Right?
Correct.
Usually we're uncomfortable because it's like, don't cry, because it's like, if you're going to cry, I'm going to cry, and then we're all crying, right?
And people actually say that.
Oh yeah,
all the time.
Exactly.
Like, please don't cry.
So,
I honestly think I was saying it inside when you were crying.
Yeah,
I was like,
sure.
oh my God, I think I'm going to cry now.
Absolutely. And and for example, I will watch something, not cry at all, but if I watch it with my wife and she starts to cry, then I'll cry, because it's a empathy thing, right? So with fear, it's the same way. It's like, okay, don't be afraid, calm down. And also there's a tendency to, especially if you're a female, to go, well, you're being hysterical. Right? Like that's the number one way that men can shut down women who are showing any kind of concern or fear. Oh, you're hysterical. You're blowing things out of proportion. Right? And I think Piglet tries to be just consistent, and he's still there. Oh, well, I really think we shouldn't do this. Oh, I really think this is a bad idea. And just doesn't back down, I guess, from him trying to get a point across, and look, there's a lot to be, like I said, if there's something, and we have a tendency also, this is what I will say about fear, because you're right. Piglet is really the embodiment of fear to a certain extent. Fear is our natural warning system. Right. If you go to any course that is about women protecting themselves, one of the first things they will tell you is, if you are in a situation and you are feeling fearful, if that's going off in the back of your head,
trust.
That is your natural defense mechanism telling you and installing that fight or flight mechanism to try and save you. A good friend of mine, she dated someone who turned out to be a serial killer. So she went on a date with him and got all the way up to his apartment and was noticing things like, oh, look, there's all these knives and all these, to the point where he had locked the door. And she found a way to get out of there, left her shoes behind. And then 2 weeks later, that guy was arrested for killing 7 women.
Oh my gosh.
And yet she ignored all the warning signs that were going off in her brain because she didn't want to seem like she was being hysterical or unreasonable or what have you. All these warning signs throughout dinner, all the way in the taxi and she only gave into it when it got so big and she's looking around.
It had to touch every sense. That's the thing. I think that's really fearful about that is she knew it. She felt it. Right. She didn't trust her instincts. And then she had to tap into another sense, like walking in and visually seeing it, which put her at a significant amount of danger rather than trusting her own instincts, which that's the other thing I think is interesting about Piglet. He's confident in his consistency. He is. He's confident in his consistent fear and holds true to that, but still manages to do what's right. So in closing, let's say you were sitting in a room with a bunch of leaders that are running not-for-profits now, which I think are the very fabric of our society. I know I'm biased, but if not for all of us continuing to provide services, we are partners to the government, partners to the communities we're part of, but there are many piglets in our world. What do you think Piglet would say to this group of people who still, regardless of fear, of losing funding, wondering where the resources are, trying to protect the populations that are really at risk now? What kind of advice do you think Piglet would give to those folks?
Well, I'll tell you something. I told you I taught improv for years. And when I used to teach basic improv, I'll tell you something about fear that I used to teach that was the core of what I taught in basic improv. There are 2 types of fear, okay? There is real fear. There's a train coming. It's 2:00 in the morning and my 14-year-old isn't home yet. there's a guy with a knife coming at me.
Right.
Those are real fears. And then there are false fears. False fears are 99% of the fears that we experience in our lives. False fears are the ones that stop us from doing the most things that we should be doing. Common false fears for everybody: giving a speech, yes. Job interviews, asking a woman or a man out on a date. These are all false fears. There are fears where the negative results are only in our head. If you go in for a job, what is the worst thing that can happen? You already don't have a job.
Right.
If you go in and they say no, you still don't have a job. Nothing has changed in your life whatsoever.
Right.
It's not like they're going to get on the phone. I just talked to Bob and tell all the other people that give jobs that Bob's out. If you're in a dance club and you see a beautiful girl and you want to ask her to dance, you're not dancing now, right? So if you go up and you say, hey, you want to dance? And she says no, you're still not dancing.
Right. Things changed.
There's no downside. There is only upsides. And that fear is what's stopping us from experiencing only upsides. Because if that girl says yes, now you're dancing with a pretty girl, and maybe you're going to start a relationship that you wouldn't have started because your fears were trying to stop us. Or you might get that job that you wouldn't have gone out for. Or you might get that grant that you didn't think that you had any chance for, right? So fear is the primary thing that stops positive things from happening in our lives. And it's all those false fears. What I had my students do is keep a fear diary. And literally every day, write down the things that fear came up for you that day and what it stopped you from doing. And then at the end of the week, you look and you go, here's all the things I didn't do because I was afraid of doing them. And try and imagine, well, what if half of those things had worked out positively, right? So how much are you affecting your life by not engaging in the world because of fear? And when you can identify the difference between real fear and false fear, that is when I think you can start to really move forward in life and your career and so forth. I think that's the biggest key to achieving the goals that you want to achieve in life, is identifying, is that real or is that just in my head?
Right. And also the consequences.
Right.
What's the consequences of doing it versus not? So let's go back to that question. So now let's have Piglet speak to the world of piglets. So these are people that are actually overcoming the fear, or maybe not, and still living in fear every day of not having funding, not having the resources, but go out day in and day out and still persevere and walk forward to do the good work that we all want to do to help make somebody's life just a little better and make this world a little bit more compassionate and empathetic to each other. Because I think that's what I find missing in the world at times. Not in the world I'm in, to be honest, where I spend the majority of my time, but there is a lack of compassion in our world for other people's suffering. So because we do have these piglets marching around and continuing to overcome, what do you think Piglet would say to them?
Let's see here. So, did it here? Well, I know it's a scary place out there, and I know that the whole world looks like it's going to eat you. But if you just put one foot in front of the other, and then one step becomes an entire journey. I hope that makes sense. Oh,
It does. It does very much.
That's all, folks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. So thank you all for joining us today at Making Impact. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell.